It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Richard Foltin, as I said, the Director of National and Legislative Affairs for the American Jewish Committee. I appreciate our polling data being used, Professor, but do want to note that it's not American Jewish Congress. That's an old issue within the Jewish community and certainly for our organization. So let me begin with a disclaimer. And there's going to be some overlap between the talk you just heard, and now that's the danger when sometimes in a day-long conference like this, but also particularly because we are, of course, a 501c3 organization. We're nonpartisan. We neither oppose nor support candidates for public office. So I'm not going to take the kind invitation that was on the flyer that I should tell you what's weighing in favor of one candidate or another, neither from my perspective nor that of AJC. What I do want to talk about, though, is, among other things, what the polling data that AJC has just done indicates about the Jewish vote, of which you've already had a preview. I do want to also note that, of course, our nonpartisan status does not prevent us from engaging with elected officials nor with candidates. In fact, it's very important that part of what we do is that we reach out certainly to candidates for President of the United States, but also at regional levels, state levels around the country with state and local candidates in an effort both to convey what our concerns are, what we think are the concerns that are those of the Jewish community writ large, as well as to get some insight and share that insight with the candidates for public office. Thus, if you go to our website, no talk is complete these days without giving a website. If you go to our website, www.ajc.org, you will find that we have just posted responses to questionnaires that we had sent to President Obama and Governor Romney, to which they have kindly responded, which cover a range of issues, both international and domestic, that are certainly of concern to the Jewish community. In addition, we've done meetings with high officials in both campaigns over the course of the last few months. We have had a presence at the conventions where we did programming on, this is unusual for political conventions, we actually did programming on substantive issues alongside the conventions, dealing with energy policy, dealing with the Middle East, dealing with, and you'll understand why we did it this way in a moment. In Tampa, we had a program on Jewish-Mormon relations, and in Charlotte, we had a program on Black-Jewish relations, as well as programming on the relationships and common issues and causes and concerns between the Jewish community and other communities in the United States. So that's sort of the wind-up. And I'd like to start with a story that actually I just heard when I was in shul on Shabbat morning, and my rabbi told a story that was told apparently by Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik to his congregation at Congregation Kehilat Jeshurin in Manhattan over Shabbat Shuvah, that is to say, Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rabbi Soloveitchik, you'll recall, delivered the invocation at the Republican convention. And he told the following story, that he flew to Tampa, Florida for the convention. When he arrived, he was escorted into a large room with congressmen, senators, governors, and other politicians. And I'll cut the story short. Somebody came up to him and said, "Who are you?" I responded politely, "I am Mayor Soloveitchik." "Are you from Florida?" She asked. This other individual, he said, "No, I'm from New York." And then she said to him, "Can you please tell me what city in New York you are the mayor of?" So the rabbi made the comment that this was the first time that his first name had attracted more attention than his last name. So that's sort of a new story. What's sort of an old story is that for many election cycles, in fact, I told this story from this podium 4 years ago. We've been hearing that Republican partisans will assure us that this will be the election in which the Jewish voters will break from the historic allegiance to the Democratic Party, and Democratic partisans will poo-poo the likelihood of this taking place. My prediction is you will hear both of these things happen today. Will this year be different? And here's where a little bit of history is in order, although you've already heard some of it. The Solomon Project has done this really terrific study called Jewish Americans Voting Behavior 1972 to 2008. And what we see in that survey, or rather in that study, is that Jews have voted overwhelmingly for Democrats at all governmental levels, even as rising income levels might have suggested a much greater trend to Republicans. As with all the other data I'm sharing with you today, I'm not saying this is a good thing, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, it is what it is. That Jews see themselves as liberal, or certainly left of center for the most part, even if moderately so, and as well tend much more to be registered as Democrats as opposed to Republicans. That's just the fact. And this is the case notwithstanding their income levels that have risen over the years, as well as the portrayal by Republicans of themselves these days as the more pro-Israel party. But to date, this has not happened. There has not been this shift in the Jewish vote. And it reminds me of the famous aphorism of my late colleague, Milton Himmelfarb, who famously said that American Jews earn like Presbyterians and vote like Puerto Ricans. Now, there have been two distinct 16-year periods, and I think this was seen here on the I don't have the slides, but you've seen them already this morning. From 1972 to 1988, Jewish support for Democrats was basically in the 64 to 68% range, except for the aberrational 1980 election involving Jimmy Carter, in which the GOP garnered some 31% to 37% of the vote. And it appears that in that year there were a number of factors. First, there was a significant third-party factor. John Anderson was running, and he took some of the Jewish vote. There was the antipathy towards Carter. Whatever his evangelical background might have had to do with the vote 4 years earlier, by 1980 there were already a significant number of folks within the Jewish community that felt that, they did not regard him as a friend of the Jewish community. And even so, Jimmy Carter got more votes than Ronald Reagan. If you put aside John Anderson's vote, the fact is that the Democrats still got more votes than the Republicans, even though it was a plurality. Beginning in 1992 through 2008, you see an even higher level of movement towards the Democratic Party, something like 74 to 79% as you look at the range, with the GOP getting 15 to 23% of the Jewish vote. So you see a shift basically from about 2/3 of the Jewish vote going Democratic to about 3/4. Now the shifting point is between the first President Bush's run in 1988 and then his run for re-election in 1992. What's the explanation for this? Some people would point to the particulars that there was this conflict between President Bush and Prime Minister Shamir. There was a sense, again, in some quarters, certainly not everywhere, but some quarters that there was a needless confrontation between the two sides. But even if there was some reason for the reduced Jewish vote that had to do with that conflict, those disagreements between President Bush and Prime Minister Shamir, that certainly would not explain the continuing of that trend in later years. So there's also, and I think you've heard this mentioned already, the sense of a greater identification in perhaps in the Jewish community's view of the Republican Party with the religious right, which is a more systemic issue, and certainly longer lasting than the flashpoint between two particular leaders. So that's in the past. Now, looking forward, are we likely to see any changes in the Jewish vote? The speculation has been that there has been a change in Jewish demographics that might lead to a change. That, as with every demographic group, each election brings forth a new, younger cohort that is voting for the first time. Perhaps their political views are not the same as those of their elders. There's been an increase in the Russian Jewish vote. They do tend to be more conservative in their voting patterns, and of course the increased Orthodox portion of the demographic, which also, as I'll get to in a moment, has a different voting pattern than the larger population. So the question has been, will all of this, taken together with the drumbeat in some quarters that's based on the sometimes testy relationship between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu, will that make a difference? Also, we've seen in the general population, there's expected to be a drop in the support for the president. Whether it will be enough to cost him an election, of course, that's what November 6th is going to be all about. But the expectation is that in most demographic groups, you're going to see a drop in the vote, making this a much closer election for President Obama than the last election was. And the Jewish vote, since Jews are part of the general American population, one might expect that there will be that drop, if only because the economic factors might be driving that vote as well as whatever impact Israel is going to have against this. So against this background of history and speculation, I want to turn for a moment to the polling data from 3 recent AJC surveys, a national survey, and 2 separate surveys that we did in Florida and Ohio. Why Florida and Ohio? Of course, first of all, there's significant Jewish populations in both, but more to the point, as we all know, we don't really have a national election. We have 50 separate state elections, and Florida and Ohio are 2 of the key swing states. So we focused on those, again, in the interest of developing information, and again, this is a nonpartisan, objective effort at developing and sharing data, certainly not based on any particular desired result. Our exit polls for 2008, or generally, it wasn't our exit polls, but exit polls for 2008 showed a 78 to 22% gap between President Obama and Senator McCain, then Senator Obama and Senator McCain. More recent analysis has shown, has suggested at least, that was an overcount for the Jewish vote, that in fact about 74% voted for then Senator Obama. Our national poll, with a margin of error of plus or minus 5%, has shown that overall there has been a drop, but it is still a significant majority who are telling the pollsters that they will vote for President Obama, as a 65% rate to 24% for Governor Romney, with 10% undecided. And there's a split when you ask the undecided. You know, if somebody forced you today to decide who would you vote for, it splits roughly in the same proportions, which suggests that in fact the president, if those polls hold true, will do somewhat better than the 65% that's showing right now. There's a very definite split again within the streams of Judaism. Orthodox Jews would vote for Romney by 54% to Obama 40%. Conservative Jews 64% for Obama to 23% for Romney, and Reform Jews 68% for the president versus 23% for the governor. The just Jewish vote is 68% also. I'm never sure what just Jewish means, but whatever it means, it's the same proportions roughly as the Reform Jews. By age, because I remember I mentioned earlier there's some speculation that age is going to make a difference. The fact is the youngest cohort votes more or less like their elders. The only decline that we see is, interestingly enough, in the sort of middle category, people aged 30 to 44, Jews aged 30 to 44, somewhat lower vote for the president, 57% to 24% for Governor Romney. By gender, President Obama does better with women than with men, reflecting the general gap, but not by huge numbers. And I think significantly as well, the issues. We hear all this talk about Israel, but the fact is, among Jewish voters, as with the larger population, when they're asked to tell us in descending order what are the most important issues for them, they tell us the economy, health care, and national security. And that's true not only at the national level, but also at the Florida and Ohio levels that they looked at. I should say also, just because I'm cut it so much short, that the Florida and Ohio numbers very much resemble, they're not exactly the same, but they very much resemble the national numbers that I've been talking about. On a range of issues, American Jewish voters favor the Democratic Party over the Republican Party for quote-unquote making the right decisions. They also it continues to be the case, even though they're not so high up on the scale in terms of what are the most important issues. Israel and Iran do continue to be important issues for American Jews. But here, and this goes to the question of how effective these campaign ads that are playing in Florida and elsewhere might be, American Jews basically say that they would support military action by the United States and even more Israel if diplomacy and sanctions fail to stop Iran's quest for nuclear weapons. But they also, a majority of those voters, those Jewish voters, 61% approve, while 39% disapprove of the way President Obama is handling the Iranian nuclear program, so basically supportive of what he's doing. And similarly, when it comes to U.S.-Israel relationships, where 71% of Jews agree with the statement, caring about Israel is a very important part of my being a Jew. Nevertheless, it is the case that 61% approve and 39% disapprove of the way President Obama is handling Israel-U.S. relations. And when asked which major party is likely to make the right decisions regarding U.S.-Israel relations, 60% chose the Democratic Party and 39% chose the Republican Party. So what we see here is it's not that those issues aren't important to American Jews, but they're by and large satisfied with the way the incumbent is handling these issues, and therefore don't. It's often been suggested that there's a basic bar you have to make in terms of the Jewish community. You have to persuade them that you're good on Israel, you're going to be good on security issues specifically having to do with Iran, and once you've met that bar, then the Jewish population can turn its attention to other issues. And when, one could argue Carter failed that bar, he lost a lot of Jewish support. Arguably, that was the case for the first President Bush as well. But here, at least according to this polling data, the suggestion is that the president has met that bar, and therefore the inherent liberal-leaning tendencies of the Jewish population can go in the direction of the candidate that's more favorable to them on those issues. Again, not a good thing, not a bad thing, just the way it is. So against this data, not too surprisingly, as with most polling results, you've got different people reading different things into this. I see my friend David Harris in the back. The NJDC has issued a statement saying, AJC poll, clearest proof yet that Jewish voters are rejecting the Romney-Ryan ticket. And we're told that the comparison you have to make is to the polling data that was done of the Jewish community at this same time of year, 4 years ago. And if you look at that, the argument is being made that it's comparable to that, and that we should expect that President Obama is going to prevail with in the Jewish community with a very substantial vote and not a significant decline compared to 4 years ago. That's one argument. And then, of course, my friends at the Republican Jewish Coalition have their own statement, which says, new Florida poll hints at trouble for Obama and Jewish community. That shows a continued erosion of support for President Obama in the Jewish community. This poll showed that President Obama would receive just 69% of the Jewish vote in Florida, a key swing state with a significant Jewish population. You pay your money and you take your choice as to which one of these is more accurate. But I think what is clear, as my colleague Ken Bandler, who oversaw the poll, has said, that we're not going to see a significant shift from Democrat to Republican among Jewish voters. That's not going to be in the cards this year, in large part because of what I discussed earlier. So if not a whole-scale shift, and even if not all, even mostly because of Israel, is any of this going to make a difference, or are my friends at the RJC, spending all these millions of dollars in vain in Florida? Well, the fact is that in close election, you don't necessarily have to swing in a population entirely in direction. Marginal shifts can make a difference, especially if you've got a state where, as in the last election in Florida, what was the final? I think that the final difference was 635, something like that. So if a relatively minimal decrease of the Jewish vote in Florida, say 10% of that vote, while still leaving a solid majority for the president, could arguably make a difference in Florida, thus explaining why there's so much attention being paid to the Jewish vote in Florida and elsewhere where there are potential swing votes, as is the case elsewhere. A swing Ira Foreman, who was working within the campaign, the Obama campaign, has been quoted as saying that a 65% vote for the president, which is still a substantial majority but less than last time around, could conceivably lose 83,500 votes in Florida, could lose 41,500 votes in Pennsylvania, could lose 19,000 votes in Ohio, all as compared to 2008. And so in the end, I'll finish by saying, I'll finish with a cliche, I guess. In the end, the only poll that's going to count is the poll on Election Day, and we're all waiting anxiously to see how all that turns out. And with that, I'll finish once again with my disclaimer. Of course, I'm providing all of this really in the effort to provide some objective information and not because we're supporting or opposing any candidate. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Foltin. I just want to follow up on something that was raised by Professor Swears, and I'm sure she'll have something to say as well. This fascinating triangulation between the Republican Party, evangelical support for the Republican Party in Israel, and Jews who seem, emphasis on seem, to be somewhat repulsed by that, moving back to the Democratic Party, and then we'll get a follow-up.
Okay, so, the question...
Have you noticed that as well?
Notice I'm taking the microphone apart. I think there are different reactions. There are those within our community who feel that we make friends, or allies, I should say, on issues, and when you can disagree with somebody on one issue and not another. So we value the support for Israel, even though there may be those within the so-called religious right with whom we disagree on some other very important issues. And similarly, I have to say, and this has been all over the newspapers, there are very strong differences with some powers or forces within the mainline Protestant church on Israel, but we remain allies with them on other issues. The question is, though, in terms of how that plays out in party politics, if you think that a party is pushing, it could have an impact. If a voter thinks that a particular party is pushing that part of the agenda of the religious right that they're not comfortable with, but they remain, and the other party is not doing that, but they remain comfortable that both parties are friends of Israel, that can make a difference for a voter. And I think that may be playing out. And again, goes back to why in 1992, we all remember the famous or infamous Buchanan speech at the Republican convention, that may explain why there was this shift. To be sure, there's still significant numbers of Jews who are Republicans and conservative and will vote that way, and for whom that's not troubling enough or troubling at all.
One of the difficulties we always see with trying to poll Jews is that if you do the normal, the traditional kind of polling where you take a swath of people and ask them questions, 2% of your general swath is going to be your target audience. How did you do this polling?
Okay, well, I'm not opposed to it, but I know that they do data, and one of the first questions you have to ask is, are you Jewish? And you're looking for people. We polled about, I think the number is over 1,000, I know, which sounds like a small number, but in the world of random sampling, that's a reasonable number to get that many. I can tell you, though, that I discovered a way in which some of this polling data might be biased against a certain class of Jews, which is to say, my phone rang on Friday evening. I could see that it said Gallup poll was calling. I would have been delighted to talk to a pollster, but I'm not picking up the phone on Friday evening. So, you know, who knows? You know, that may cause a tilt in the polling data.
One final question. Professor Swears, is there anything you might want to add?
Thank you. I very much enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I was wondering, since you have such polling that goes into demographics, if you could say something about which groups, I guess, of Jewish voters you see as the potential swing towards Mitt Romney, and if you see that swing coming based on Israel or based on economics.
Well, we don't know why somebody chose. I mean, they were asked how important are certain issues to you, but the correlation of with the voting for the candidate because of this issue, that we don't know. But we do know, as I said, that among people identifying themselves as Orthodox, they actually vote more for Governor Romney than for President Obama. So while that may not be what carries the day now in the Jewish population, we are seeing a change in the demographics within the Jewish community where the Orthodox population is a larger one. However, we also have to note that larger and larger population is in New York, where it's going to take a lot of Republican votes to change what is a traditionally blue state to a red state. So, you know, first of all, the question is what's going on within the Jewish community, but then the question is what difference is that going to make in the way an election plays out. It conceivably could make a difference, though, at the congressional level, of course, where it is important what local constituencies are doing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Foltin.
Thank you.
Thank you.